All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Latz, State Senator in the Senate District here, St. Louis Park, Hopkins, and part of Edina. My right is Representative Larry Kraft, my left, Representative Cheryl Joachim. Together we represent Senate District 46. This is our annual pre-legislative session town hall meeting where we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're anticipating, what's coming up, what things have looked like up to this point, what we foresee with session, and then we have an opportunity to listen to you, to your comments, your questions, to which we'll respond. You don't have to ask a question. You can just make a comment if you want. Just a couple of basic ground rules. This is a nonpartisan event, so we will ask people not to get partisan and not to assume that everyone in the room shares your views either, but there might well be some diversity of views here, which is a good thing. We want to hear all of it. That also is the second ground rule, which is please be respectful of people who say something that you might disagree with. Everyone has an opportunity, if you want, to come forward and to share your views. When you do, I'll ask you to identify yourselves and to speak into the microphone up here at the podium, because this is being broadcast live through St. Louis Park Community Television, and it'll be rebroadcast as well. So if you want to go back and watch it at any point, it'll be available throughout at least the next week, I'm told, at various times of the day. If you can't sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, this is a good thing to help you achieve your goal then. So I guess I'll start, and then we'll listen to the House members. First, before we go any further, I think we have to acknowledge the pain that the immigration enforcement has been causing on our communities of color, on our communities of lawful residents, those who don't have legal status here, and citizens also who have been caught up in it or even targeted by federal immigration enforcement. And while I think we all certainly welcome the announcement today that they are drawing down and ending the surge, that hasn't changed the policy of the federal government as to how they're going to approach immigration enforcement, and there's a lot of cleanup left to do as we transition, hopefully, to a more peaceful communities. We have a lot of work to do to support our friends and neighbors who will continue to be facing struggles, who have fallen behind financially for one reason or another, if they haven't been able to go to work, and so on. So please keep your focus on supporting those communities as well, and patronizing the businesses that have been hard hit as well as that. I do want to note that this upcoming, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ron Latz. I live in St. Louis Park. I'm a defense attorney in private practice. I serve in the state Senate, where I chair the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety, Budget and Policy Committee, and I serve on the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee as well. My wife and I have raised 3 children here in St. Louis Park, lived here for over 30 years. And with regard to the upcoming session, I want to make a couple of notes. One is, it's not a budget year officially, although there will be budget proposals on the table, and we'll be addressing some of them as we can, depending on political will and votes and availability of funds. We don't know yet what those funds will look like. The latest forecast had a $2.3 billion forecast surplus for the existing biennium, but the next biennium, it's got a $3.8 billion shortfall. And depending on what happens with the federal government and their funding relating to SNAP and medical care, food benefits and medical care, it could be up to $6 billion shortfall in the next biennium. Those are the current forecasts, but I'm getting told from leadership, and I think the general sense is politically and fiscally, it's going to be challenging to do a whole lot in terms of new spending this upcoming legislative session. And part of our focus will be, my focus anyway, will be on trying to set the table so that we can maybe mitigate the long-term structural deficit that we're looking at in the next biennium, so that it's not as bad as it might otherwise be. There are a lot of issues that'll be coming up, but I think it's worth a little bit of a review on what foundation we will be building on this coming legislative session, which is another way of saying, what have we done Since the beginning of, well, my term anyway, and I guess because the House has 2-year terms. This goes back to 2023 when our political party, the Democrats, took political control of basically the 3 decision-making bodies in terms of the state government, the governor's office, the Senate, and the House. The House now, of course, is equally divided, and it's created a different political environment. But we've done, I think, quite a lot. We've taken a lot of steps to address gun safety. 2 of those bills were mine, but not all of them were, although I was active because I chair the committee and because I've been active in the space for a long time. I was the point person in the Senate for most of the gun violence reduction initiatives. The universal background check bill, the red flag bill were mine. We increased penalties for straw purchasers. For example, we passed the binary trigger ban. We passed a ghost gun ban. On public safety issues, we passed at least quite a few things, but my bill included among them the Minnesota Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act, which created incentives for people in our state prisons and people on parole to take advantage of the opportunities in those areas to rehabilitate themselves, to get treatment, to get educated, to develop workforce skills. The incentive is to reduce the amount of time they end up spending in prison, which is about the most powerful incentive I think you could give to someone. And then once they're out on parole, if they remain successful in the community, they get the additional incentive of leaving parole early. That also has the secondary but very valuable benefit of reducing prison population, which reduce costs for the taxpayers of Minnesota. We passed a lot of initiatives in a lot of different areas. I'm just going to highlight a few of them for you to reflect on. We passed the paid family and medical leave bill, the earned sick and safe time bill, the $15 minimum wage. We passed $100 million in tax relief. We passed the PRO Act, codifying Minnesotans' reproductive freedom. We passed Restore the Vote, another way of saying allowing felons to vote once they leave prison and back in the community, paying taxes and reintegrating into the community. We passed $5 million for emergency food shelf funding. We passed school meals funding, so no kids are going to go hungry in schools and they can learn better. As well, we passed a 100% clean energy by 2040 initiative, a very powerful anti-climate change agenda. Unfortunately, the president has just recently completely pulled the rug out from under the federal regulation there by eliminating the legal basis for federal regulation of energy and climate, which is, to me, just absolutely stunning in one sense, but unfortunately it's consistent with his position on this all along. We banned conversion therapy, just an absolutely a terrifying and terrible practice. We passed the Trans Refuge Act to make our state a refuge for trans individuals. We legalized recreational use and regulated cannabis use in Minnesota. We passed tuition-free college for all Minnesotans with incomes under $80,000 a year. We enshrined the Minnesotans' reproductive freedom with the PRO Act. We passed the largest bonding bill in state history, $2.6 billion for public works. We lowered RX or drug prices. We banned price gouging. We capped payday lending rates. We eliminated hidden junk fees. We ended deceptive online ticketing sales tactics. We did historic funding for our K-12 schools, over $2 billion increase there. We increased penalties for using deepfakes to influence elections. We exempted gun safes from sales taxes. We passed an extra $300 million in public safety aid to communities around the state to help cover the costs of enhanced safety in our communities. We enhanced restorative justice measures to stop the cycle of reoffending. We did child tax credit reform and property tax relief. We exempted almost all Social Security income from taxes in Minnesota. Let's see here, what else? We did a lot on the affordable housing and tenant protection front. We invested over $1 billion in new housing, rental assistance increases, the first-time home buyers programs, the Bring It Home rental vouchers program, family homelessness prevention, emergency rental assistance, housing infrastructure grants to local governments, which some communities are doing all on their own. Some are sharing it with the counties to work together on those. We passed community stabilization money. For tenant protections, we established a minimum 14-day notice for evictions. We passed a very broad eviction expungement provision, so people who are subject to eviction provisions, it won't haunt them for the rest of their lives. It being optional by a judge in the interest of justice where they think it's appropriate, but mandatory if the tenant wins, if the eviction matter is dismissed, if it's settled, if both parties agree to expungement, or nothing else after 3 years have passed. Even with an eviction on your record, the eviction must be expunged. We passed a right to counsel for tenants who are facing eviction proceedings in public housing for breach of lease reasons. We mandated fee disclosures for potential tenants in ads and in their leases so there aren't any hidden fees. We passed a tenant right to organize in cases of unsafe or unclean living conditions, delayed repairs, and so on in apartment buildings. We passed DWI reforms. Representative Kraft and I teamed up in the wake of the Park Tavern tragedy to one of the most significant DWI reform bills in a long, long time. We, at least under my specific jurisdiction with regard to the judiciary, we passed substantial funding increases for the courts particularly, and the stakeholders involved there. Massive increases for the public defenders to equal and level the playing field. For civil legal services that hadn't seen increases in years and years, and we're only meeting about a third of the demand for their services. People were going into court not knowing what to do, and now many more of them will get services. We funded interpreters so they could stay in the courts and continue to be able to earn a living. We funded forensic psychiatrists and psychologists for those who are in the criminal justice system with substantial mental illness issues. We've been working on local bonding initiatives over the course of a number of years as well. Hopefully, we passed the big bonding bill. We got more to come. So looking ahead, we've got a lot to do, and I'm going to want to look in part to hear what you have to say, what we should be looking at in the coming years. For me, my priorities are going to be defending our Constitution and democracy, first and foremost. We're going to have a hearing in about a week on a number of proposals in the Judiciary Committee relating to addressing the excesses of ICE. We're going to seek to pass the Minnesota Bivens Act, which will give a state cause of action against federal agents when they break the law. We're going to look to pass safe spaces, schools, courts, and religious institutions, for example. We're going to be looking to criminalize or at least create a civil cause of action, rather, interference with rendering aid or failing to render aid as a law enforcement agent if someone's injured. And we all know, what I'm talking about there as well. So those are just some of the things that we're going to be doing. We're going to be focusing on holding government accountable with regard to our own U.S. constitutional and Minnesota constitutional Bill of Rights, and for holding government accountable with regard to the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. And there I'm talking about fraud, and if anyone wants to get into that, we can talk more about fraud initiatives that I expect to see. We'll be making extra effort to fight bias and discrimination, advance justice, and civil rights. We will have more affordable housing initiatives. We'll have some additional gun violence reduction initiatives as well, including secure and safe storage. Because of some court decisions, we're going to have to repass the binary triggers and ghost gun bills, and there will be more coming as well. We're going to have a hearing in the Judiciary Committee also on surveillance issues, and this has also been in the news. Flock and Elite and the federal government, the immigration agents' use of surveillance technologies. It's not just the federal government that uses it. It's state and local governments that do as well. I think it's a good opportunity and time for us to take a much broader look at facial recognition technology, use of license plate reader data, and other data use, including how AI factors into that. So a lot going on, a lot coming up ahead of us. Some of them will be projects for this legislative session, but my guess is, especially given the closely divided legislature, a lot of these initiatives are going to spill over into the next term of the legislature as well. So with that, I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to tell us what they're thinking about for this legislative session. Anything else they'd like to share? So we go by seniority. We'll go.
Sure.
Representative Joachim.
I'm Representative Cheryl Joachim, and I represent 46B, and it's been an honor. It's all of Hopkins, the first northwest corner of Edina, about a quarter of Edina, and 2 southern precincts of St. Louis Park. And my husband and I have raised our 3 kids. We've lived in Hopkins for about 29 years. They're all grown and married, and now we have a team to help get them across the finish line. It's better than saying they're somebody else's problem, so I try to be positive. I serve on the Education Finance Committee as the co-chair now since we're tied. I serve on taxes and on Ways and Means. But I wanted to start first with a heart full of gratitude, looking out at all of you and knowing how much our communities have stepped up to take care of their neighbors. Whether it be making sure kids get to school safe, or people get to businesses safe, or to helping invest in our small businesses, to the knit-in just here in St. Louis Park and Needle and Skein, just to people bringing food, donating monies to the food shelf. Thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing to make sure our neighborhoods stay safe for all of us. And we have we have a lot to do. Senator Latz gave a good list of things that we did in 23 and 24 and what we were able to kind of protect. And I look at the list and I used to joke about, well, it's like democracy if you can keep it. But that has a whole new meaning now. Since we've had over 3,000 ICE agents come into our community to terrorize our communities, disappear our neighbors, shred the Constitution, basically, and kill 2 Minnesotans. Things look different now, but it's because of the work everybody's doing to take care of our neighbors that I think things are going to hopefully start calming down. But yes, I just have a very full heart thinking of all that you've done. We, some of the other good things that we did in the education realm in 23 and 24 that we've been trying to keep with besides universal meals is indexing our school formula to inflation to give our districts some stability. We also doubled the money for our English language learners because we were basically giving them maybe 6 years to learn English and then dropping them off a cliff. We put money into full-service community schools so kids could have wraparound services. We had a special education cross subsidy that we cut in half because the federal government's never paid what they promised. We created a whole funding stream for student support personnel aid to get more counselors, social workers, nurses, and psychologists into our classroom. And then also we had a real focus on both literacy and the READ Act. Unfortunately, we're going to be in recovery mode now. We were just seeing a difference for our kids in their mental health and showing up at school, and now they're afraid to go. One of the things we really have to do is codify our schools again as being a safe space for our students, for our teachers. We shouldn't have to have mothers and fathers in their Subarus guarding their bus stops to make sure they can get to and from school on time. We really are looking towards, we are tied in the House, second historic tie. It has been a very interesting time setting a state budget last year. I've always prided myself, 2 other gavels that I held, to be working with my minority lead. But until I had to work with somebody to put a budget together from the other side of the aisle, I realized now I was kind of checking boxes. So I've learned and evolved and figured out even more so how to work with folks on the other side of the aisle, because sometimes you need to do that to get it done. But we really will be looking towards the Senate to getting a lot of things at least into the negotiation table, since they have a 1-seat majority. One of the reasons why we were so successful in 23 and 24 is we were lucky enough to have money left on the table, some of it from COVID, because the federal government at that time helped us. And I had also been working for 4 years in the House to have those bills pass and get better and better, but unfortunately die with a different majority in the Senate. So now we look to our Senate colleagues to help us keep pushing those bills out, that hopefully when we're all working on the same side of the table, we can get some of the really good work done. I do see some openings, though, for cooperation, bipartisanship when it comes to some of the issues. We've worked bipartisanly on no-knock warrants, so some of the warrantless stuff that's going on, hopefully we can have some space there. In the House, we experienced a tragedy in June with our speaker being assassinated and her husband by somebody, and their dog, by somebody that was masquerading as a police officer and then shooting John Hoffman 9 times and his wife Yvette 8. So I think there's space there to talk about masking when it comes to law enforcement. So I have some hope. Somebody very kindly asked what would a session success look like, and I think getting a bonding bill across the line would probably be one of the things we can get done, even though we need a supermajority to get it passed, which is sometimes hard to do, to get 60% in a tied House. But I think we have some hope there. And then it is going to be, if I had $1 for every time I heard this isn't a normal year, I'd be really rich by now, because I spent 4 years as a parent advocate, 8 years as a Senate staffer, and now I'm going on my 12th year as a House member, and I would have a lot of money if I thought there was actually a normal year. But this year has its own set of complications that are kind of layered on top of where we have a shorter session, mid-February to mid-May. We have a deficit we're probably facing in the tails. It is an election year, which tends to make people want to talk a lot longer, especially on the floor. We are in the House where we have on the GOP side 3 people running for governor, somebody running for auditor. On the Democratic side, we have a few people running for Congress. So there's going to be a lot of talking going on in a short session. And then we also have the layer on of some of the grief we're all still feeling, and everything that's happening on the outside that we want to get done, and differing opinions on what that looks like. But with that, I still have hope we will all come to the table as adults and try to work things out. And I know I want to get to questions, so I could talk more about one of the things we really should focus on too this coming session is we're going to be in recovery mode, just like we were after COVID. Recovery mode for our communities, recovery mode for our small businesses, especially recovery mode for our children in school. So that will be laser focused in our first few hearings in the Education Finance Committee. I know a lot of the other committees will be looking at that as well. But I want to get your questions, so I'm going to pitch it over to Representative Kraft.
Thanks, Cheryl. Good evening, everyone. I'm Larry Kraft. I represent the other bit of St. Louis Park that Cheryl doesn't have, 46A. In the House, I'm the co-vice chair of the Energy Committee. I also serve on Transportation and State Gov. I'm an assistant leader. And I'm also the co-chair of the House Climate Action Caucus. I do want to start out by talking about today. There's a lot of reason to be, I heard someone say at an event I was just at, distrust and verify. This was trust, and we should distrust and verify, I think. But today actually is also a day for hope, because I'm gonna lean into hope today. The prospect that this surge is ending is such a relief with the trauma that it has caused everyone, the impact it has had on families, on our schools, on our economy. I don't think this should be partisan. It's been unconstitutional. The law has been violated over and over again. But we're winning. And we're winning this because of you all, right? Because of the actions of individual citizens coming together and helping each other and loving each other and not letting, and filming what's happening, right? And bearing witness. If we hadn't done that, if you all hadn't done that, this would not be ending, right? We have shown the country, we have shown the world how to stand up to authoritarian fascism. That's what we have done here. And it is really powerful. And so I'm leaning into that today to say thank you and to be hopeful. And then tomorrow I'm going to distrust and verify. Okay? And I tell you, one of these things that people need to learn from what's happened here is that immigration enforcement, I don't even want to use the term, cannot go on the way it has been practiced here. It cannot go on this way. Our federal partners need to not fund this. They need to strip it down to its roots and reimagine this to something that is sane and humane, and it just needs to, it can't be done this way. So anyway, moving on to session, which is amazing that it's less than a week away. We do have a split house, as has been said, so it's going to be interesting. With 3 people running for governor, we're thinking about selling popcorn up in the gallery. And I want folks to remember, in a split house, 67-67, one thinks, well, all you need to do is you need to get one Republican to come over and support what you want to do. Doesn't really work that way, because you have to get through committees, get bills through committees to get there. So you need to have and each committee is evenly split, so you need to have a majority on a committee. And then the last committee a bill goes through before it goes to the floor is the Rules Committee, and that's how things get calendared for the day. And the Rules Committee is controlled by leadership, and leadership is not going to let bills go to the floor unless there's a substantial amount of folks in their caucus that are supporting it. So it means that, it's not 68 votes that we need to get something done, but it's more along lines of 80, 90 votes that we need, unless you end up making some deals or something like that. So just understand that this session, with the election that's happening, with everything that's just happened, it's one of the reasons why we're trying to set low expectations. That said, we are going to be pushing on some really important things. ICE-related legislation, both to try to prevent what happened from happening again on the unconstitutional side of things. I think the recovery, how we're going to help heal the community and heal small businesses and heal students and families. So that gun violence prevention, this is one where, for all of us in the legislature, but in the House DFL, it is very personal. And regardless of what we're able to do or not this session, we will not forget what's happened and that we can do better from a gun violence prevention perspective. And then lastly is affordability. You're going to hear a lot of focus on that issue. We think there's a lot of ways of tying into affordability, of really thinking broadly about that. So I think those are some themes to watch for. Personally, as many of you may know, I got involved with politics to do something about climate change. Climate change doesn't care about our politics, doesn't care that we're tied in the House. I'm determined to find ways to make some progress this year. I'm working on a bill on something called plug-in solar or balcony solar that I think I can get some bipartisan support for to enable a new kind of renewable energy market here. Also in something called virtual power plants, which is a fancy name, but it's about how you can use the grid we have more efficiently. Those are a couple I'm going to try to get done this session. Working with a bunch of students on something called the Seal of Climate Education, which is a program that came out of Colorado. It's a voluntary program for students in school districts that enables students to do some coursework and a project work, and then be able to get a seal on their diploma saying, hey, they're climate literate, and it can help them in progressing to higher education in their careers. I want to relook at EV fees, which we raised too much last session, and I've got some ideas on how maybe we can lower those and put maybe some additional fees on very heavy vehicles, which deteriorate roads faster and cause, if they hit you, cause more injuries. Other areas I'm working on: road safety, on habitual speeders. Learned a lot from working with Senator Latz on the ignition interlock bill. There's a kind of device called the intelligent speed assist that one can put on a car and can keep it from going over the speed limit. So for folks that are driving 100 miles an hour and doing that over and over again, I think they should not be able to do that. Continue to look at housing this year. I'm trying to increase the supply of housing. And those are the main things. One other. Somehow I became an expert accidentally on excavation. Dial before you dig. So that I've worked with that industry a bunch now, and we're going to be coming back to try to do some tweaks in the excavation realm. So those are things I'm working on, but would love to open it up for questions.
So let's go, let's go ahead and do that. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, just step right up here to the podium. Just give us your name and
If I could also add, if you'd rather write your question, if you don't feel, Caleb raised up in the back there. Caleb can bring you a piece of paper to write it on, and he's happy to bring it up here if you prefer to do it that way.
And while people are thinking about coming up to talk here, I will note, I think, Cheryl, I think you left some red cards and I left some white cards on the back table there that talk about your rights should you have an encounter with ICE or Border Patrol. So on your way out, feel free to grab some cards, educate yourself, hand it out to friends, family, coworkers.
And I brought some state constitutions if there are any left, because, you know, it's always good to know your constitution.
That's great.
And ours is a little bit stronger than the federal Constitution as well in certain areas. So come on
All
forward.
right.
All right, one brave person to break the ice.
Prize for who goes first.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Cindy Gray. I live in St. Louis Park at Excelsior and Grand. And my concern is my granddaughter goes to PSI, and I know that there have been a lot of kids that have been afraid to come to school, and there's been scrambling by the staff to try to figure out how to do dual learning. And I don't know how those kids are getting their food or how we're going to transition back, or is this remote learning going to be a continual thing? How are they going to handle that, do you know? And how is the legislature going to support all that?
That's a really good question. And luckily, we learned a lot from COVID on how to do that. And I know St. Louis Park took a 2-day break to kind of do that switch over and get the devices in place with kids. We had put some statutes into place in the last few years to make it easier for folks to have that flexible learning, especially when it comes to if a kid has 15 unexcused absences. Now, there's excused, and you can do that for a while, but unexcused, 15 days of unexcused, if they don't show up, they could get unenrolled. But we had done some legislative changes, mostly around absenteeism, to encourage our districts to talk to those families sooner. And they're required now to talk to the families within 10 to 11 days. And if they do, and they set up any type of plan that constitutes providing education, that 15 days can start again, and that can keep happening. So there's ways to try to make sure that our districts are still getting the average daily membership for the kids they're providing education for. Districts have been very creative, and if they're struggling, they can always contact the Minnesota Department of Education to help them through some ideas. But it is a real concern to not have kids in school where there's those other wraparound services. The meals districts are figuring out, kind of like they did during COVID, and I have to do a huge applaud to Step Food Shelf, Veep Food Shelf, ICA Food Shelf for their emergency packages, and all the people that are very quietly delivering those to families, and the counselors and the social workers that have connected families to make sure. We're asking a lot of our schools right now. So there is that plan to pull those back, pull students back, but it's about being able to feel comfortable and trusted, so that those relationships have to be built again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the shout out from the food insecurity side. I'll make a pitch for Cub Foods in St. Louis Park over in the West End. They have prepackaged bags of food that any customer there can purchase, and they will see that they get distributed to families in need. I bought one 2 days ago when I was at Cub, so encourage all of you to go out and support it that way too. Come on forward. Either one.
I'm Claudia Oxley. I'm also from St. Louis Park. And my question is, I haven't heard you talk about election safety. And I have huge confidence in Minnesota elections, their integrity. My questions are not about that at all. I'm an election judge. I understand the process. But our elections are going to be at risk. And I really want to understand from a legislative perspective what defense we can do as the state of Minnesota to just protect our people, protect our votes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? By at risk, do you mean in terms of the tabulating and results, or in terms of physical safety?
Both.
Or in terms
Both.
of attempts to invalidate the election altogether?
Let's ask all three. Okay. I mean, I don't think we're Minnesota, right? We can't control what goes on in Washington. I get that, but we have We are still not in agreement with the federal government about our constitutional rights. And I expect that to be an issue again at the polls. We're going to, glass half full here, we're going to see those ICE agents again. And what we're doing within the state to really convince all of our people that our elections are as strong and secure as they are. But we've got a whole media show going out making sure that people suspect our elections. And that's communication, and that's integrity, and that's really doing what we all can to make sure that people get how secure this is here. And I think you all have a role in that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm just looking up to get the details on the Minnesota Voting Rights Act that we passed
Okay.
in
thank you.
2024.
While he's doing that, I would want to thank you for being an election judge. I know those are very long days, and we have passed some laws around protection for physical safety of election judges. In the state statutes, we also have the 100 feet from the poll rule that Secretary of State Simon has very forcefully talked about, and how we can contact our local law enforcement if people do violate that. But you're right about worrying about the misinformation that's out there. And all of us have a role to play in countering that with our neighbors and our friends. Our no excuse absentee early voting, that's getting challenged, but we actually have a lot of bipartisan support for that, especially mail-in ballots, which it's over 3 or 4 counties that rely on that in greater Minnesota. That's all they do is mail-in ballots. So I think we have I know Secretary of State Simon has also been pushing back on the data requests he's been getting from the federal government, but so have 26 other states, and not all of them are Democrats. So I think we're getting to the point, especially with elections, that the alarm bell's ringing loud enough that this might just be that, bridge too far for a lot of people. But I think making sure we're sharing that the correct information and battling those misinformation is the first step. And I'm trying to think if there's any election bills that we're looking at this year to make sure. And you've looked up the statute.
Yeah, I don't
so.
know anything specifically coming on the pipeline for this year, but in 2024, Minnesota passed the Minnesota Voting Rights Act, which created a private right of action in state law to sue against racially discriminatory voting policies. So part of it was in particular to protect Black, Indigenous, and other Minnesotans of color from discrimination in voting. It protects voters from voter suppression and vote dilution, makes it easier for voters experiencing discrimination to fight back in court and through collaborative non-court processes. It requires the courts to interpret statutes around elections in favor of voters and their equal right to participate in the political process. So there's some specific things we can do, and certainly lending our support to Secretary of State Simon, who is valiantly battling the federal government over their grab for private data that federal government has no need to have. Because, look, the Constitution specifically, explicitly enshrines the power to conduct elections in the hands of the states. So when the president is talking about nationalizing elections, that would be clearly unconstitutional. But as we've seen, that hasn't stopped the president from trying to do a lot of things that are clearly unconstitutional, and then by the time the challenge winds its way through the courts, some of the moments have passed. So I'm going to speak in a little broader terms. It's incumbent upon us to fight the federal government at every step now, every time they cross that constitutional line, to build the reflexes, build the support, and build the public understanding that there are lines that the federal government should not, must not, and it should not be allowed to cross. And that will bolster our courts as well to do the right things. We can't control what the U.S. Supreme Court does. We don't have any explicit control over what any of our judges do in the state or the federal system. But we can, as a community, come together to defend our Constitution. Now, me, for one, I mentioned earlier, I'm a defense lawyer. So I spent my professional career as well as my political career defending our Constitution, defending individuals against encroachments that are unconstitutional. And as chair of the committee that I chair, I think I'm in a particularly strong position to continue that defense and to protect our democracy. And election law, election rights, most of those bills also come through Judiciary and Public Safety committee. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to do collectively.
I'm sorry, I do want to say, like, I do think Democrats in our legislature have an obligation to be reaching out to Republicans on this issue, because this serves all of us. So there may not be a bill, there may not be that, but there needs to be that kind of, whatever you all do when you're not voting, those kind of conversations are really important.
I'm going to say one other quick thing, which is, I don't think I'm going too far down the road here in terms of conspiracy thinking, but I think that the federal government or this president is trying to set the table so that the military can come in, if he thinks it's appropriate, and try to influence or invalidate or intimidate voters at the polls. And the way Minnesota has fought back against the immigration enforcers, against the Border Patrol, against ICE, has made very clear that we're not going to tolerate the militarization on our streets. And I think that sets a stronger standard, a better bulwark against using those kinds of tactics when we come to elections.
Yeah. You're right. We need to be having those conversations with Republicans. I've with some of them, I'm like, okay, what is the line? What is your line where you're willing to put your job on the line? And I'm not going to say who, but it was very right, was that where we come to is, yeah, if Trump tries to run for a third term, that's a line for him. So I think you're right. We need to have those discussions. And I would love to say that, well, we can pass this piece of legislation and address it. But, you know, this administration has shown that they are willing to violate the Constitution. And the reason we're winning now is because we held them to account to that. You all hold them account to that, right? And so we're learning what it means in this generation of what we need to do to fight to keep our democracy. So it's not going to be easy, but we've just learned how to win, right? And I think that's the really hopeful part of what's happened over the past couple of months here, and how we're showing the country how to win. And I think that is going to serve us well when invariably because these kinds of challenges come up. I mean, we saw it with Bondi saying, hey, we'll take ICE agents out of here if you give us your voter data. Well, you know, no. So we need to be prepared, but I think, you know, what's happened here gives me a lot of hope.
And we say voter data, it's voter data above and beyond what is legally allowed by law, including Social Security numbers and immigration status. So I think Larry's right and Ron's right. Like, we have shown them. I mean, imagine all the energy we're expending now turning into November and making sure people can vote. And I think we do have those conversations. I brought up the mail-in voting because that is a very bipartisan thing, that people are like, whoa, wait, don't take that away. So I think there's hope on that. And I'd love to, you know, you might just see that energy turn to a new endeavor.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And remember, if you want to just write it down and have Caleb bring it up, you can do that too.
Thank you for being here. My name is Andy Willett. I live in St. Louis Park, in the Willow Park neighborhood. So I have a lot of reasons for coming up in front of you today. I guess what I want to focus on is just the surveillance technology that you mentioned, Senator Latz. I think that's one of the ways where we need to continue pushing back against ICE overreach. And I also think it's a way that we could get bipartisan support from Republicans who at one point in time used to care about government overreach. And so I'm wondering if you've had conversations like that with your Republican colleagues, and are they receptive to that?
I haven't specifically for the upcoming session yet, but I will. And there are a number of Republicans that I know have a particular interest in the Senate on data issues, on data privacy issues, on surveillance. And some of them are experts in the technology space. as well. There's a group of libertarians in the Senate Republican caucus, and it does bleed over to some in the Democratic caucus as well. And some things I certainly consider myself to be a libertarian, or understanding the limited reach of government in certain areas. So I think there is lots of opportunity for bipartisan concern there, and to address this. I mean, from facial recognition technology, from the FLOC program that immigration has that they're using to aggregate data from commercial sources, from personal data sources, to literally populate their screen with the location of individuals that they think they should be targeting for their enforcement actions. They're gathering information from our license plate data, and as far as I can tell, not from the government collection point, or even from what I gather, the private contractors that store a lot of that data, but it's getting out there somewhere, and we have to figure out how that's happening. Yeah, we're definitely going to have to take a serious look at that. So I appreciate your lending your support to that effort.
I want to say I have not had conversations yet, but it should not be allowed for ICE or anyone to use a camera or whatever to film someone or their license plate that are exercising their constitutional rights of observing, and then find out where they live, follow them home, and circle around to intimidate them. That happened to far too many people in this community that were exercising their constitutional rights, and that use of technology is wrong, and we should prohibit it, and everyone, Republican or Democrat, should be terrified about that. So, thanks.
Yeah, I've had some conversations. I like to call that accidental allies. We have to find all the accidental allies that we can where that stuff crosses over. And we do have a lot of folks that care a lot about data privacy in Chapter 13. We passed some legislation around that 2 years ago in the education space to keep student and parent data private when it comes to that. So there's work being done, but this year it's more important than ever.
Thank you.
I'm sure both of you know who I am already. My name is Kevin Yao, and I live in St. Louis Park, by the border of Minneapolis. So, I'll just make a more grandiose statement, not policy specific, and then the other part, I'll just kind of share my frustration that I'll get to it. So, what I think is Democrats really need to use every lever they have to get their agenda done. We cannot just defend the Constitution, defend the right to choose, defend X, Y, and Z, and we cannot just defend. We need to do things to diminish the power of demagogues like Donald Trump. Like, we really need to do more, and being the good guy and try to reason with them isn't enough. Like, we need to continue to focus on delivering material benefits for the working people. I'm glad that I've seen a lot of that back in 2023 session. Like, I would love to see more of these being delivered, because these are making sure that people are fed, making sure that people have housing, making sure that people have the basics is one very powerful tool to diminish the rise of demagogues, I believe. And what I'm seeing from response from the governor to many mayors and local leaders is that what I felt, the people who actually have the power don't use it to the extent possible to counter the Operation Metro Surge and the damages that it's done. Like, I've heard a lot of progressives are saying that they believe that Tim Walz should have wrote an executive order on eviction moratorium so that immigrants who are adversely affected by the Metro Surge would be able to live without the worry of being kicked out of their housing. Among some other items that Tim Walz could do, such as not necessarily policy-wise, but daily conference, for state employees within executive branch to allow them to work remotely until further notice and on and so forth. So what I'm seeing is that I know I'm not going to diminish like what he has done, like we're negotiating with the federal government behind the scenes and on and so forth. But sometimes it's annoying for me to see them like not using the leverage to the extent, and that's one frustration that I have is that like, come on, like do like use as much power as possible, because what I'm also seeing is that like people like Donald Trump are abusing his power, and then Democrats, and then what I'm seeing the Democrats responding is, well, I'm going to just sue. I'm just sue as if Trump is going to follow the rulings. No, he probably won't. So what I'm saying is that I really hope to see Democrats use more leverage. And specific to what, I'm not an expert, they'll have to decide what it is, but really use more of the leverage that you have, especially the ones who are elected statewide. And I hope that you can reflect some of these like sentiments that I have. And one last thing I just want to mention is that because we're so bogged down with this like big ticket, what I call big ticket items like ICE, like ICE, like affordability and on and so forth. I mean, not that they're not important, but and I felt this is what I'm seeing. Like many quote unquote smaller issues don't get addressed, such as like every time, like as a person who doom scrolls on social media quite often, I always come across with content that really should have been regulated, right? Like people filming themselves harassing people and call it pranks, things like that. Or even things like, like when I'm even with the very intersection within my neighborhood not having stop signs, and I was talking to I was talking to the city's 311, they were like, oh, it's fine. Well, because I'm not originally from Minnesota, so I've lived in other states. I've never came across intersections that don't have stop signs. Things like that to regulate like home inspectors, like people who inspect homes. They don't need any formal training to become a home inspector, and on and so forth. There's so many of these smaller things that they're not necessarily smaller, but they're not like necessarily what the hot button topics are. They're just constantly being ignored. And then these problems continue to fester. It just never gets those attention. Yeah. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I just want to share my frustration on this regard. Thank you.
I appreciate your frustration, and I appreciate the fact that you called your city council people about stop signs because infrastructure is important. No, it's hard to figure out what space you play in. All of our members are in doing different things. Some of us are more behind the scenes and organizing. One of our members is a nationally renowned elections lawyer, so she's been more on the front line. I've kind of lost count of the number of our members that have been pepper sprayed and followed home and doxxed. But it is our duty to get out there more and be more vocal with the platform we have, and I appreciate that. And the small issues, I appreciate that too, because sometimes I like to think I hate to think that we live in but we do, in a world of bumper sticker politics, that only the things that fit on a bumper sticker are sexy enough to pass. So there are, other things that we need to do that really make the world go around, really make Minnesotan life more affordable for Minnesotans. I want to address the eviction moratorium item though. So the governor was able to do that during COVID because he could declare a sense of health and safety emergency. Mm-hmm. Under a certain statute of law, he was allowed to do that. That statute doesn't work with this. He'd actually have to declare martial law, which would give Donald Trump every excuse to send in military. Mm-hmm. So it's like that really fine line. So we're really looking towards our cities to help with that, and all the nonprofits and things that have helped with supporting folks with rent. But that's one of those things, the eviction moratorium's been bandied around because we've used it before, right? But that was a circumstance that was under statute that he could. Now he would have to declare martial law, and we would have troops from Alaska here within a day. Mm-hmm. So it's one of the reasons. Yeah, it's not a great reason, but I mean, it's a reason. It explains it. It doesn't,
Yeah.
But it doesn't make it much better. So we have a big package that Representative Howard and Representative Agbaje have been working on, rental support, to help. So we make sure our landlords stay afloat as well, but have that money go to the people to stay in their homes, because barely got through February rent, and now March is going to be due soon.
Yeah, thank you for the...
I want to say first all, thank you for being impatient.
Of course.
That's okay. That's good, right? You should. This is really good interaction. A couple things we talked about, will Trump follow the ruling? actually, there's a bunch of times when he's lost and it's stuck. Now, take some time. So, but just recognize that he wants, in these kinds of things, the idea of an autocrat is to make you feel that you can't win, that there's no way, and you get down and depressed. But you have to realize that he has lost this here in Minnesota, and he has lost many times in court. That has stuck. Now, part of the reason we have to make sure it sticks is with visibility to it, with us making sure that happens. Right? We're in a situation where we can't assume that things happen. I want to also say, you had a point about negotiating with the federal government. What I have heard from the governor on what happened today is you certainly heard a bunch of things that Tom Homan said, the more cooperation, all that. But if you listen carefully what the governor said, and I saw him after the press conference today too, was that we haven't changed anything about how we deal with ICE. Mm-hmm. So just understand that there's what's being said by Homan and the administration to say, hey, where we can save face and draw down the Metro Cert and what's really happened. So we'll let that play out a little bit. But anyway, thank you for pushing.
Yeah, of course.
The only thing I'm going to add is that the issue of regulating online content is a real tricky one because the First Amendment restrains what we can do to regulate online content. Mm-hmm. I think unless you get into public safety relating to youth and abuse, even sexual abuse, and those kind of things online, most other things online, as much as we may hate it, are constitutionally protected free speech, and the government can't regulate it. Mm-hmm. So we got to be really careful, especially if we're going to stand on a line of protecting that Constitution. What do we do? I understand it's frustrating. I get stuck doom scrolling too, just like probably everyone. But we got to step back a little bit and understand there's only certain things government can do.
Right.
And part of my job, as I see it, is to hold government accountable for not crossing those lines.
Right.
So, but thanks for raising the issue. It certainly is one that we're struggling with to try to figure out how to handle it.
Yeah, of course. I want to keep this in the conversation. There's so many issues that are not necessarily hot button, but also very important in terms of what specifically. I don't have I know what the issues are, but I don't necessarily know what would be the best solution. But I'm happy to, see what what's to come.
Thanks for raising them with us.
Of course.
Why don't you go ahead and then we'll take some of the
Yeah.
written questions.
I'm Kirsten Brecky-Albright. I know all of you pretty well. First of all, thanks for having town halls. I think we're fortunate to live in St. Louis Park where our elected officials want to show up and hear what we have to say. I'm here with my professional hat on. I'm the development director for My Health for teens and young adults. And as I was sitting here, it occurred to me, I'm like, I don't know if I have a question as much as a concern. My role probably 10 years ago looked very different. But today, the onus on the amount of fundraising we need to do to take care of the young people that walk through our door every day is daunting. I'm thankful that we do live in Minnesota and we have a lot of generous people, generous foundations, but the equation looks really different. Last year alone, we provided over $1 million of uncompensated care. And that's primary care, mental health services, the wraparound care that our young people need, and that's 12 to 26. And we are really one of a kind in a very large area. So I guess my ask is that what do we have in the works holistically, or what can we do at the state level to kind of ease our angst about what the coming year is going to look like? We know that some of the Trump administration's cutbacks in the big ugly bill are going to affect us in ways we don't even really know right now. So I just want to say our young people need us, and I want all of you to know about us. And if we need to show up at the Capitol and have deeper conversations, I'm happy to do that, but I'm concerned.
Well, thank you for that. There was quite a few years ago, Catholic Charities, the Catholic Health Association put out a booklet, guidelines on uncompensated care in the medical healthcare system, recognizing it's a substantial cost. And where do you draw the ethical lines in terms of what do you provide, what don't you provide, what percentages are appropriate, how do you keep the data, those kind of things. A recognition that the care is not cost-free, it's just not reimbursed to the provider. The provider, to a certain extent, still has an ethical, moral, and legal obligation to provide a certain level of care to anyone who walks in the door, depending on the need. Emergency rooms, for example, hospitals get caught up in this all the time. And part of what we need to continue to do is just to recognize that it exists there as a problem. Also to recognize that we are all paying for that care. The cost doesn't disappear. The cost gets passed along as a cost of the healthcare system, which has to be reimbursed to the hospitals by the insurance providers and by Medicare and by the taxpayers, ultimately by the businesses that provide health insurance to their employees or in their premiums. Part of what they're paying for is the money that has to go to help the hospitals keep the doors open by covering that uncompensated care. So it's a problem we all have a stake in solving. It's particularly a big issue, with Hennepin County Medical Center, of course, because they're the last resort provider of very expensive care in the state, not just Hennepin County. So thanks for highlighting the issue. Still needs a lot of work.
It ties in with one of the questions we have here. What are the plans for the Minnesota legislature to replace the loss of federal funding for schools, Medicaid, housing assistance, other cut funding? This is not a budget year. Next year will be. And our budget outlook isn't fantastic. And with cuts looming from the federal government, it's not a pretty picture, right? It would be irresponsible for me to say, hey, we can solve it all. We're going to have to do our best, and we're going to have to also look for other areas. And I'll tell you one that, especially in this area of care, that I think we have put up with for far too long in this country, and that is our approach to health care. I firmly believe we need to move to single-payer universal health care across the country, but we can start it in Minnesota. And I give you why I think it's even more important now. We talk about these funding gaps. We spend about more than $6,000 a person more in this country than other developed countries, and we don't get the same level of outcomes. $6,000 a person in Minnesota, that's more, that's not total, that's how much more we spend. That is about $35 billion in Minnesota. So I think we need to get on that path. There's savings to be had there from the amount that insurance companies charge, that big pharma charges. There's paths in there. An initial step that we can take is to pull the private care out of our managed care services that we from the government side. I've heard that could save us up to $1 billion. So I think we need to really seriously start going down this path. It's not easy. But you know what? The previous person that said we need to be pushing, I think this is an area where how do we find these kinds of dollars? Well, it's getting rid of the huge waste that happens in our healthcare system today. Yeah.
And I just say ditto to that, and let's grab coffee because I want to understand your funding streams better so we can figure out if there's pockets that we're missing.
Perfect.
Especially in areas that are already established. Even we have JCP grants around youth and homelessness that maybe we can, so yeah, let's.
I like creative thinking.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, can I read a question from the written? All right, one here is, do you have hope that the FBI will cooperate with BCA to investigate the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good? Do I have hope? Yes. I think we need to keep pushing, right? We can't, do I expect it? I don't know if I expect it or not. I would, unless forced, they won't. So I think we need to really keep pushing on it. You heard some better things about Alex Preddy's investigation than Renee Good's, but I, that continues to be something. I think that was something the governor mentioned today in his press conference, that we need to stay vigilant on that and keep pushing for that. So our work is not done. Given the success that Minnesota has had in this area and how we've pushed back, I have hope.
The scene of Alex Preddy's murder, our BCA showed up with a judicial warrant and were turned away by ICE. I've heard the same thing that from our accidental allies, because Mr. Preddy was illegally carrying a gun, that we have some kind of bipartisan support pushing on that, or at least from the gun owners community. I hope really admire the resignation of all the U.S. attorneys that said we're not going to investigate Renee Good's widow. I think, unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic because she was part of a community that isn't always taken care of, that's going to be swept under the rug. But everybody will keep pushing, and I know our Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, our Department of Public Safety, our law enforcement is really pushing to be part of that investigation, in both investigations. So there's hope, but it's a really big hill, especially for Renee Good.
And my understanding is the BCA and the FBI are working together, at least to some extent now, on the Preddy murder. How much evidence sharing that involves, I'm not sure is even public at this point. So I think there's more hope on that one. We have an advantage. I mean, it's obviously a problem that there's not the ballistics that can be done on a lot of these, but we do have cameras. And you've all seen the online reconstructions of the video evidence. Frankly, there's a lot that can be done with that alone, especially in the Renee Macklin Good murder, because so much of it is essentially about reconstructing the path of the vehicle and where the officer was, and whether he had a legitimate fear of substantial bodily harm or death from her conduct, which is sort of the legal analysis that might justify use of deadly force. You can get a lot of that information just from the data that is publicly available. But obviously, so there's the possibility that the Hennepin County Attorney's Office will have enough evidence to bring charges, even if the federal government, the FBI, doesn't cooperate. That's out there as well. So I might not have a great deal of hope that the FBI is going to work really closely with our state law enforcement agencies or with our prosecuting authorities. I have more hope that there might be enough evidence out there to move forward with charges regardless of that.
And I'd want to echo also how important it is to have those videos and to have all the work that everybody's been doing. There was a Quinnipiac poll that showed that the video of Renee Good, 80% of our country has seen that. You never see that kind of saturation on something like this, and I think that is really what made people start paying attention. I know there's some frustration right now because it feels like the media has stopped paying attention, and people have stopped paying attention because we have got the Olympics now and things look like they're calming down. So I encourage for folks to still be reaching out and sharing their stories. And social media, even though I hate doom scroll, I always doom scroll too. On social media, with family, with friends, with anybody in the newspapers, radios. When Angela Davis just had a show on the other day. They're always looking for callers calling in. I'm working with a constituent right now to try to figure out. She's really interested in trying to get the helper story out there and all the people that have been helping. So we just have to keep telling our stories.
All right, next question. And actually, before that, I didn't acknowledge, but our county commissioner is in the audience here, Marion Green. Good to see you, Marion. Thanks for coming. All right, so this one, I'll read it and one of you can start. Are there ways we can support mail-in voting for those that may be afraid to show up at the polls?
Yes, that's our no excuse absentee voting that we have. And that takes help from family and friends and neighbors and whoever would like to help somebody sign their ballot. I don't know if during COVID, but that kind of got shot down by the courts afterwards, that we did a brief stint where there didn't have to be anybody that witnessed, but I don't know if we have the legal standing to do that again. But we have a lot of people that'll help people verify their ballots when they send them in.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of getting the word out on that it's available, because the statutes already provide a very easy pathway forward for that.
Yeah, and this to me is really interesting if you think of the context of all these networks that have been formed in our community and many other communities. Right, so we've learned some things about how to work together and how to organize in grassroots and all the leaders that we have in the community. Where does that go? Well, if we're defending democracy, the biggest way, one of the most important ways you defend democracy is we got to vote like we've never voted before. So I would encourage folks that are leading in those areas to think about how you, over time, as we have less to do in defending the community from ICE, how we turn that power into something that's lasting civic engagement. And so educating people on, okay, if you're concerned, here's how you just sign up here, right? You know, you need someone to come by, I'll come by. I mean, let's start thinking about how we really turn that into just sustained civic, really strong, even stronger civic engagement. All right, next question. Given their substantial environmental cost and drain on resources of local communities, what legislation, if any, is being considered to limit the building and or subsidizing of AI data centers? So I can start on this. We actually passed something last year in 2025 that started to do that. I would say the chair of the Energy Committee, Patty Acom, was leading on that. And at the end, given our split in the House, it had to be a negotiated agreement. And she said, you know, it's probably 75, 80% of what I would want. So there's some things that not as far as she would like, but we did start requiring more environmental reports, environmental oversight of these things, put more protections around water. We changed the tax treatment. So they still get a decent tax treatment, but we did eliminate one of the tax areas on their energy. They used to be able to get not pay taxes on their energy use. Now they're going to have to pay taxes on their energy use. We put some other bounds around it so to protect ratepayers, right? And if they have to build out more infrastructure to support the data centers, you don't want them to say, you know, okay, we're gonna be doing this, and then pull out a few years later and leave the infrastructure still there unpaid for. So there's more guardrails and stuff around that. So we made some progress around it, but not as much as we would like. It'll be hard to do things, make more progress on that in the current setup. I do know that there may be ability to bargain a little bit. I know that the Republicans are going to be bringing a bill to try to give some flexibility in areas that are losing fossil fuel plants, maybe having a little more flexibility for data centers in a place that's losing a coal plant per se. So maybe there'd be an opportunity to give a little bit there, given what's being transitioned from. But yeah, that's kind of the state of play right now.
So I've got nothing at all to add on the environmental side, because we took some really substantial steps recently to address that. But I think what we also have to recognize is that unless all of us are willing to give these things up, there's going to be a need for AI data centers. There's going to be a demand for it. We are all demanding it. Every time you go on your phone now and do any kind of a search, AI is involved in one way or another. It's involved in every workplace as well. So unless we're willing to give up using AI, there's going to be a demand for AI data centers, and we're all going to benefit from that. So to me, the question is, how do we find the most economically efficient and environmentally friendly way of providing the energy and the computing power that's necessary to meet those, the public demand, the business demand, our society's demand for AI assistance. And that AI is going to save a lot of lives. It's heavily used in the medical profession right now, even to analyze x-rays or MRI or CAT scan. results. It's being used in research. It's literally saving lives. It's being used to design all sorts of things that we never imagined in the past that make our lives easier, as well as giving us quick responses like what does Minnesota Voting Rights Act contain. So it's a balance. We're all going to have to figure out a way to, I think, accept that we need data centers, that we need the energy to support the data centers, and we've got to find a way to do it in an environmentally sustainable way. And I think in Minnesota so far we're striking a good balance for that, but we need to stay vigilant on that as well.
You're also seeing some movement around in local governments around non-disclosure agreements that some companies are demanding when they come in and want to build something. So that's hopeful. City councils are starting to realize that they need to let a little bit more sunshine in when it comes to contracts they're making with folks, and that's from pressure from their constituents.
That is one area where it's possible there could be some bipartisan work on limiting NDAs around data centers. We had a hearing with them last session, and some of the reasons they give for NDAs, I think, are suspect. So there may be an opportunity to have some more transparency. That's all the written-in questions. Cut off.
I'm sorry. Okay.
We're good.
I'm Sharon Lehrman. I live in the Birchwood neighborhood, and I have two things. One, I want to know how you feel about protecting our boundary waters. I'm really concerned about the legislation at the federal level and taking away the protections. So that's one. And my other one is about passing a state ERA amendment. I understand that's supposed to be coming up in the Senate, so I wonder if you could address those two items, please.
Well, let's take the second part first, because I just had a conversation. Let's take the second part first. I literally this afternoon had a conversation with Senator Kunish, who is the chief author in the Senate of the ERA, about when and how we can bring it in front of the Judiciary Committee, which is its first stop in the Senate. So she's working off of language that she's indicated she's got broad support within our caucus anyway. I told her she brings it forward, we'll absolutely give it a hearing and we'll move it on. If she's got the votes. I mean, ultimately it's about that. So I'm optimistic that we can get it at least to the floor of the Senate, probably through the Senate. But it takes two legislative bodies to pass a proposed constitutional amendment and get it onto a ballot. So as we already talked about, the House is going to be a little bit trickier on that one. On the BWCA, usually I'm sorry, go ahead.
Ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why would the House be against it?
I'm going to let the House answer that one.
Why would the House be against the ERA amendment? I mean, what is the
That we have
rationale?
We're tied. We have the DFL votes for it. We have 0 Republican votes for it.
We passed it in 24.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
and it
right.
got stuck in the Senate.
Anyway.
And it's important to make sure, and I'm anxious to see what Senator Kunish has been working on, that it's also an inclusive ERA amendment. And I think that's what got bogged down in the Senate last time. So, yeah, it's just because we're tied. And I don't even want to give air to some of the crazy reasons why they don't want to pass it.
Yeah, we had a hearing in state government last session in 25. So we're keeping it alive and keeping pushing for it. But yeah, with our current makeup.
Yeah, and there have been about 3 different versions of the ERA floating around. So there's been a lot of discussion about exactly how the language should look as well. That's been part of the difficulty in trying to assemble a majority in both bodies.
Yeah, we passed the inclusive ERA. That's what I hope we need to get to. Boundary waters. Did you want to go?
You go ahead.
Okay.
You got this,
All right.
Mike.
So yeah, the Stauber thing at the federal level, very worrisome. There is a bill in the House, it's House File 309, Representative, I think I got that number right, Representative Falconer, that would ban the sulfide mining in the boundary waters in the Rainy River watershed. I'm a co-author on the bill. It's one also that we likely cannot pass this session because of our makeup. But if we can pass it, it would actually Representative Falconer tells me that it would protect the boundary waters even from what Stauber's trying to do. So I think right now we need to, talk to our federal representatives, have them push back as hard as possible. And then, we'll do what we can. But I'm hopeful that we would have a different makeup in 27 where we can pass this.
And House File 309, I don't think they got a hearing last year, and it came a little late, but I'm adding my name onto it as well because, and I have to echo what, we really, really have to push the federal delegation not to vote for that if it gets out of the House into the Senate. It's just too important.
You made it.
Hi, friends. Okay, I'm Roslyn. I live in St. Louis Park. I'm right over in the Cedarhurst neighborhood. I love this community because everyone's practically asked all of my questions by now, so that's fantastic. I do just kind of want to get a gauge or see where your gauge is on the Republicans in your body's potential receptiveness to talking about let's take off the face mask. Let's do a little bit of identification, particularly when it comes to ICE. I spent a decade working at the local level of government. I always have to identify myself. I have to wear a badge. A couple years back, one of the popular things on YouTube and social media were those First Amendment audits where folks would come into a public-facing building and ask your name, what do you do, all that information. I certainly had to provide that, so I don't see why our federal agents shouldn't have to do the same, particularly when they're operating in our communities. I just want to hear about what the potential receptiveness is there. And then also for my neighbors that are here, if anyone is interested, I've created a fairly comprehensive resource document right now about how to get engaged, different resources, links to organizations that'll share information about what your rights are. And so I did it in a Valentine's Day style. So if anybody wants one of these, it says, fall in love with community. I have a whole bunch in my backpack, so feel free to pop by on your way out, grab a couple, distribute them to community groups or a coffee shop in your neighborhood. But I'll sit back down. Thank you, guys.
Rosalind, you're welcome
Thank
to
you.
put some of your flyers on the table and back. On the face mask issue, I know that's one of the bills that we're going to be hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee a week from tomorrow. And Senator Pappas is one of the authors on that, I believe. I suspect it'll make some progress in the Senate. Haven't taken the temperature of everyone yet. But I think the bigger question, even if it were to pass and become law in Minnesota, will be a federalism question. What authority does the state have to regulate what the federal agents do in terms of transparency and accountability? So my guess is that would end up in the courts, and some federal district court judge here or in Washington, if it were to ever go that far, that's where it would end up. But I share with you, look, transparency is the key to accountability. And holding government accountable is what we need to do. That's what limits government overreach. And the courts are one path for that. Community action is another path for that. And all paths, I think, are worthy.
All right, so Republicans. I think there are many that would agree that what happened in Minnesota went too far, right? And was bad policing, went too far. I even had a conversation with one who's very on the right who acknowledged that. Whether that translates to being willing, enough of them to vote on a demasking bill, whether it translates to enough of them that it's allowed to come to the floor. I mean, you'll see those bills in committee. We're going to bring them all. Whether we can get any to the floor, when the situation we have where the speaker is running for governor, I don't know, that, it's going to be tough to see some of those things to the floor. Wouldn't say never, we're going to try. And as I said, there are many that would agree that went too far, but whether that translates to votes, hard to say.
And it's one of those ones, too, where actually local law enforcement would support it as well. And they have a bill at the federal level that they're working on. I think it all depends on how much the Senate can bring into negotiations and where we can move it from there. We do have not just the tie in the House, we have 3 of their members running for governor, and they don't all like each other. So there's some weird factions going on over there that we might find some accidental allies. I don't know, but a lot of it will happen at the negotiating table, I think, at the end. And depending on how much comes over from the Senate, we'll have a little more pieces to move with.
There may be some other areas. There's one bill that I think I'm going to carry. There were helicopters involved often in some of the work, and sometimes they had their transponders off. And that's actually a safety issue. That's one of the things that caused the horrific crash it's on. Yeah, sorry, that's one of the things that caused the horrific crash in DC. So could we find some ways of saying, look, if you're a helicopter, you can't have your transponder off? Maybe there's some ways of doing some things like that. So we're going to try. And
we do have really strict drone laws as well. And there has been a lot of use of drones, in particular above electeds' houses. And I think, making sure we have those things in place and that we collect enough of the data to show that laws were broken is important too.
So I was not aware that drones have been used above electeds' houses, but let's talk, because the Judiciary Committee in the Senate 2 years ago, I think it was, we passed, in the legislature, passed a very comprehensive regulation of drones, particularly use of drones by law enforcement. I remember Chair Moeller and I worked over some of these issues because they had Fourth Amendment search and seizure concerns, and what exceptions do you make to warrant requirements, and can they fly over backyards of people on the way, maybe to try to find a lost child as opposed to, other things, and what do you do with the data that's gathered? I mean, there are a lot of issues here. We've done some substantial regulation on drones and use of law enforcement. But again, there's another question of how would that apply to federal law enforcement agents? Those are, to some degree, untested questions. Well, I just want to make a note. I mean, our official airtime, I think, expires at 8 o'clock. I don't think the broadcast will go on past 8 o'clock. So I, for one, can stay for a little while afterward to talk with people if they have individual questions. I guess any closing remarks from my colleagues, and I'll have a final word when we finish up.
I'll just say thank you for paying attention. Thank you for being an amazing community. Keep showing up. We'll keep showing up. And together we can make Minnesota hopefully safe, healthy, and affordable. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you. As again, I'll say today is a day for hope. And then tomorrow, distrust and verify.
And I'll add, well, you're borrowing a Ronald Reagan phrase there and changing it a little bit. So, we'll take our political inspiration from all sources, right? If only today's Republican Party were more like Ronald Reagan, I think we'd have a lot more common ground actually to make some progress. But I too want to thank all of you for being here, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, whatever your viewpoints are. This is democracy. This is part of democracy, elections and accountability of your public officials to be able to be in front of you, listen to what you have to say and answer your questions, and ultimately be held accountable at the ballot box. Appreciate your taking the time, your evening, to be here with us tonight. And all those of you who watch on the recorded versions or the broadcast versions, thank you for paying attention as well. Have a good evening and stay safe out there.